Welcome back, friends. So it seems like January has somehow become sequel month, huh? Well, now it's time for the logical sequel to the Elden Ring Minor Dungeons Challenge Run video. It's time to tackle the Legacy Dungeons in the same format. Let me give you a reminder of the rules. Each Legacy Dungeon must be beaten using only equipment that I can find inside it, whether as an item laying around or dropped by an enemy. The only things from the outside I'll bring in are the flasks, mixed physic, spirit cooler bell, and whetstone blade. For bows and consumables, I'm allowed to restock these outside the dungeon with arrows etc, otherwise it eliminates their viability. Now, I'm not going to bring the torch this time because the Legacy Dungeons have a lot more options than the minor ones, and therefore, thankfully, aren't anywhere there isn't a weapon available for me at all. One other thing I think is fair to allow is if I need to do some quest stuff outside of the dungeon to make weapons or equipment appear inside it, such as the Volcano Manor assassination quest, but I'll touch on them later when we get to it. As always, leveling up as normal is allowed. I do also quickly want to touch on Ashes of War. So with the minor dungeon video, there was never a situation where I found an Ash of War within them that I could use, as they only ever appeared as rewards for beating the bosses. Here though, there will be Ashes of War lying around in some of them, so I'm allowed to use them, but I can only equip them to weapons using their natural affinity. So for example, if I find the Flaming Strike Ash of War, I can only equip that to a weapon as fire affinity, not as bleed poison or anything else. Also, there are some dungeons, not many, where I'll actually kill a boss with a remembrance, but it won't be the final boss of the dungeon. So in this case, I'm allowed to go to the round table hold and grab the weapon connected to that remembrance. I've counted 20 legacy dungeons in total from my research, and similar to before, I'll be using a tier system for weapon spirit ash upgrades depending on their location. In tier 1, we have Stormveil Castle, Castle Morne, and Siofra River, where I can use level 1 and 2 upgrades. For tier 2, Raya, Lucaria, Caria Manor, and Ainsel River, I can use level 3 and 4 upgrades. Tier 3, Redmane Castle, Nokron, Lake of Rot, I can use level 5 and 6 upgrades. Tier 4 is Shaded Castle, Volcano Manor, Leyndell Capital, Subterranean Shunning Grounds, and Deeproot Depths, where I can use level 7 and level 8 upgrades. Tier 5, finally, is Castle Sol, Mohgwyn Palace, Crumbling Farum Azula, Leyndell Ashen Capital, and Michaela's Haligtree / FL Brace of the Haligtree. I'm counting that last one just as one. Anything goes here, so I can upgrade weapons to maximum should I so choose. Still with me? Let me know in the comments below which is your favourite Legacy Dungeon. Not sure how this is going to go, but if you like this content, please do hit the subscribe button to help support the channel. With that out of the way, let's start with Stormveil Castle. Now, initially I didn't know whether to count Margit as part of this dungeon or not. In the end, I chose not, as technically he's right outside the dungeon and it only actually says Stormveil Castle when you go past him. So Godric is our target and we have a variety of options to take him down. Stormveil Castle does have the Hook Claws and the Misericord, but I have used both of those before, so let's go with something a bit different. I'm going to use the Highland Axe, but that's not all. We are going to use a bit of magic. First, we snap up the Godslayer's seal and then we head down the side of the castle to unfortunately fight a Crucible Knight who is pretty unpleasant as per usual. But killing him is worth it because we get the incantation aspect of the Crucible, Horn. This requires 27 faith though, which is pretty high for our first dungeon, but because I'm so committed to trying new things, I actually went and grinded for it. I equip a couple other pieces of armor from killing enemies, and we're finally ready to fight Godric. I'm not really sure how I feel about the Crucible Horn. It has quite good range as you dash forward and can be charged up. Even the fully charged hit doesn't do that much damage really. There's also times where I felt like it should have hit, but it just didn't. It's a little bit inconsistent from my experience here. The axe is okay, but it's really just an axe, so outside of a few jump attacks to help with the poise breaking, my main focus was on the Crucible Horn. It took a few tries, but I managed to bring him down eventually. Not sure I'd go out of my way to use this incantation again. It's too easy to totally miss it, and your FP is then wasted. Fun to try different stuff as always though. Castle Morne is our second dungeon in this run. There's essentially less choices than before, but we've got two options for weapons I haven't tried before, the standard whip and the steel wire torch. Whips and torches tend to be two of the weakest weapon types, and you can't do critical attacks with either of them, so this should be interesting. There's also the twin blade talisman, which increases the damage of the final attack in a combo. That's good, I guess. Anyway, I'm actually going to try and use both of these weapons in the fight with the boss, Leonine Misbegotten. One thing that surprised me was how easily it was to stagger this guy. The standard whip staggers him with its R1. The damage isn't too bad either. The MVP of this fight though is the steel wire torch. The Asher will breathe out some fire in front, and guess what? It also staggers him. With a combination of these two, this wasn't too bad at all, and finishing him with whips to the face made me feel like a lion tamer at the circus. Maybe I should do a whip and torch run in the future? Could be fun. Siofra River is our final tier 1 dungeon, so it's time to head underground. In my research, I was surprised to see this was listed as a legacy dungeon given that you can ride torrent around, but apparently it counts. There's actually 2 bosses in here, but the first one we're going to tackle is the Dragonkin Soldier. We're actually going to use a bow here, the magic damage dealing horn bow. Feels like a very appropriate weapon for this dungeon. We'll even go one step further by using dwelling arrows to increase the amount of magic damage. Now we're ready for this guy. The damage was... yeah, not amazing. The fight was kind of boring, honestly. It was pretty much just keep moving backwards, dodge his attack, fire an arrow, repeat. The only exciting part was right near the bottom of his health bar, I fell backwards off this ledge. I thought he might teleport back to his starting point, but actually he tried to come round and get me, giving me ample time to snipe him down from a distance, which was a good ending to the fight, I thought. Upon beating him, we actually get a new weapon we can use, the Dragon Halberd. Now, this might seem like a standard halberd, even with the pretty common spinning slash Ash of War, but this weapon actually requires somber smithing stones to upgrade, and its spinning slash Ash of War is different from any other in the game. After using it, our halberd gets a 45-second buff of lightning damage and frostbite buildup. That's actually awesome. We also get Marika's Scar Seal, which boosts a bunch of stats in exchange for us taking increased damage. However, none of these stats scale with this weapon, so it's basically just a handicap at this point. With this in hand, we can now move on to the real boss of Siofra River, the Ancestral Spirit. This was tougher than I expected, honestly. The halberd is actually really slow. I ended up whiffing loads of attacks. When I actually did land a hit, the damage was quite good actually, especially after the boost from Spinning Slash. This is actually only the second time I've ever fought this boss, so his odd movements caught me off guard, but eventually I took him down. I say eventually, it was maybe like 3-4 tries. But anyway, I can't say I feel too fondly on this halberd, sadly. The slow speed of its attacks was a big negative for me here, even though the buff is pretty cool. Well, anyway, let's get the hell out of here. So, it's tier 2 time. And what better way to kick this off than with Raya Lucaria Academy. Of any dungeon we've done for this challenge so far, this easily has the most available options. Being that this is the Elden Ring equivalent of Hogwarts, you just know that we got to try out some magic. First off, I found one of the sorcerer guys for their gear, and of course, an Academy Glintstone staff. Unfortunately, this staff requires 28 intelligence, so I had to level grind a fair bit. There's several spells in this level, but before the first boss, we can only get Gravity Well, which will do just fine. I also pick up one of these cool looking Glintstone crowns to help boost intelligence. Lastly, we can use some Spirit Ashes for the first time in this run, as the Marionette Ashes are available here in this graveyard. Looks like we're all set. First boss is the Red Wolf of Radagon. Being that he uses magic, I assume he's resistant to it as Gravity Well does not do a lot. This is a pretty standard magic battle, keeping him at range and letting the marionettes take the aggro. This actually had a pretty climactic finish. I ran out of FP and the marionettes died at around the same time. Wolfboy had a tiny slither of health left, so I had to deliver the final few blows by hitting him with the staff. Thankfully, his health was low enough that 3 hits is enough to end this. Couldn't have planned it any better if I tried. With Wolfie down, a ton of options open up. We can actually get 2 talismans here, both of which are pretty useful for us. The Radagon icon helps improve our casting speed, and the Graven Skull talisman helps improve the power of magic. I can also grab a better version of the Glintstone crown to increase intelligence even more, and there's also a new sorcery in Shattering Crystal. Unfortunately, Shattering Crystal requires 38 intelligence, so I had to grind once again. There's also Comet, but that requires 52 intelligence, and I just couldn't bring myself to grind that much more. As well as magic though, we can also net ourselves a new Spirit Ash in the Avionet Soldiers, and if all of that isn't enough, we've got a magic dealing crossbow, the Full Moon Crossbow. I've decided I'm going to have magic in one hand and the crossbow in the other. This is about as outside of my comfort zone as it gets. Magic and a magic damage crossbow. Time for JK Lees to get on board the OP magic build train. Or at least I thought that would be the case, but then I remembered who the boss is. Just look at that damage. Wow. I realized for the first phase, I can't really make do without a melee weapon. The crossbow is too slow, making this phase take ages, and Shattering Crystal and Gravity Well simply don't do enough damage for their FP cost, thanks to Renala's high magic defenses, meaning that I'll run out of them before the second phase even begins. I tried the Avionet Soldiers as well, but there's too many other targets here so they don't attack her when I need them to. I opted to go farm the Lazuli Glintstone sword from this guy, and this was a much better option. It allowed me to finish off the first phase at a decent pace. For phase 2, I decided to stick to just the crossbow and my magic, also summoning the Avionet Soldiers and drinking the Mix Physic which I'd saved up until this point. Pretty much all damage from everything I've got here is quite low. Crossbow does about 94 damage a hit, fully charged Shattering Crystal does 114, which just isn't worth it for the FP cost, so I stick to distance with the crossbow and let the Avionet Soldiers take the aggro. The one thing which was a game changer in the winning run was the Avionet Soldiers managed to proc bleed at one point, which was fantastic. The rest of the phase was a lot of running away and taking potshots with the crossbow. Although not helpful against Renala, Shattering Crystal did
did turn out to be great for taking out those wolves, so it did indeed play a part in my victory. Another thing that made this tough is I hadn't upgraded Vigor that much, and the Glintstone Crown actually decreases this stat in exchange for the intelligence boost. Finally, after a long near 10-minute battle, Rennala goes down. This was surprisingly tough, but fun to use a bunch of different things I've never tried before. This was quite the saga though. Onto a much shorter dungeon next, thankfully to be honest, with Caria Manor, and I'm pretty excited for this one. There's a weapon in here which I've heard mentioned a lot online, but I've personally never used it and don't know much about what exactly it does. It is of course the Sword of Night and Flame. Now, first up, this weapon's normal attacks do both fire and magic damage, which already is pretty good, but it's the Ash of War which really sets this weapon apart. Holding L2 puts you in a stance which then has two different attacks depending on what input you press. R1 fires out a magic beam similar to Comet Azure, and R2 does a wide range flame slash. It's crazy that there's a weapon with both of these, even just having one would be awesome. To supplement this, I also grabbed the Ice Crest shield to wear on my back. It slightly increases magic defense which might help for Loretta. Finally, as these Lazuli soldiers are here, I can slap on this Lazuli cloak. Now we're ready to take on the one boss of this area, Royal Knight Loretta. So, I'd heard Sword of Night and Flame supposedly got nerfed a while ago, but wow, it doesn't feel like it. At just +4, this does loads of damage with both its Ash of Wars, especially the Flame Slash. I'm already thinking about how much this would do if you had it at +10 and using stuff like Alexander's Talisman, this would destroy most bosses. Unsurprisingly, this only takes about a minute and Loretta goes down. What an incredible weapon, definitely a bit OP, but enjoyable to mess around with here. The last dungeon of Tier 2 is Ainsel River, so yes, we're going underground again. Now, I actually struggled where to put this one. You can come back to a different part of this area later where you can access some other weapons and ashes as well, Wing of Astel being the most notable. But given the entrances here in Lernia, I didn't think it made sense to do that, and it feels like the boss here is meant to be challenged with what you can access in the level so far. So what do we do for weapon? Well, we're going to get the Clayman's Harpoon. This spear does a nice bit of magic damage as well as physical, but the Ash of War is nothing too special here. I thought this was going to be a naked run, but turns out the merchant here sells the prisoner's gear which I can equip. This armor looks... well, I don't want to get another 18 plus restriction from YouTube, but it reminds me of a scene from the movie Pulp Fiction. You know the one I mean. Anyway, with all those sorted, we can take on the boss of the area, the Dragon Kin Soldier. He's a much tougher version than the previous one we fought, mainly because he has a second phase where he grows wings and gains lightning attacks. With the spear upgraded as it is, the damage we do is pretty good, so this isn't too much of an issue. This big boy goes down and Tier 2 is all wrapped up. Alright. Tier 3 already? We're going to start strong with Redmane Castle, but there's an issue. I've made what we call in the UK a schoolboy error. I plan to use the Flamberge in Redmane Castle to beat the Misbegotten and Crucible Knight boss to get the Rune Greatsword which I would then use to beat Radahn. But off camera in Tier 2, I went to get the Smithing Stone Bell Bearing 2 from Altus Plateau, which I forgot activates the Radahn Festival as soon as you go up to the plateau. You're probably thinking, well, just get the Flamberge and beat Radahn with that. Well, think again. The area in Redmane Castle with the Flamberge can't be accessed while the festival is on. Also, all the enemies that could drop weapons now no longer spawn in the castle. So, I'm a bit screwed here. My only solution was to get somebody to drop the Flamberge to me, and thankfully, a Reddit user with the character name of Crag the Courier was kind enough to give me one. If you're watching this, thank you so much. Your kindness allowed this run to continue. So, adding the Flaming Strike Ash of War to the Flamberge and equip some Radahn soldier gear, it's time for battle. The Flamberge has Bleed, which does come in handy here, and the Flaming Strike Ash of War buffs our Flamberge with fire after use. The damage we do is pretty good actually. It wasn't first try, but I didn't struggle too much with Radahn. I got the all-important stagger in the second phase, and finished him off. I feel pretty happy with how this turned out, but that happiness dissipates when I remember there's still the matter of the Misbegotten and Crucible Knight duo. There's only one thing for it. Let's bring them down with the Star Scourge Greatswords. The Misbegotten falls with no issue due to the Starcaller Cry Ash of War, but the Crucible Knight is a bit tougher. He doesn't stagger at all from the first part of the Ash of War, he can easily smash through our health bar. After some carefully timed hits, he goes down and we are done with Redmane Castle. Things started off as a bit of a mess, but we had a good comeback. The next logical step, well, it's to go down into Radahn's crater for Nokron Eternal City, so that's what we're going to do. This is a new record for this challenge because there's actually 3 bosses we're going to fight here. But first, we pick up our first weapon right near the start, another torch. The Ghost Flame Torch, which does magic damage and inflicts frostbite, which is awesome. This leads directly to our first boss, the Mimic tier. Now, I know I could easily cheese this by unequipping my weapon, but where's the fun in that? Let's go, torch versus torch, a torch duel for the ages. Okay, not really, it's Mimic tier, so it's still an extremely easy fight. No issues really. With that out of the way, we're going to tackle the remembrance boss of this area, the Regal Ancestral Spirit. I've actually only fought this boss once before, so intrigued to give it another go. The Nox Flowing Hammer is our weapon of choice here. It's got a sweet spinning whipping attack for its Asher War, and of course deals strike damage. I actually took the time to farm some armor here, mainly because the Legacy Dungeon bosses from here on out do a lot of damage, and I need to give myself every advantage possible. I've even got this neat shining horned headband. I'll also be bringing the Great Shield Soldier Spirit Ash to assist me. A weird thing happened with them though. They all died quickly apart from one of them who stuck with me through a large portion of this fight. As for the boss itself, he's not too tough. The only thing that makes it challenging is his ability to heal himself at points. I managed to break his poise at just the right moment to finish him off. Overall, the hammer isn't too bad. The Asher War has great range which can be handy. The Great Shield Soldiers are a pretty good summon for drawing aggro, but they do very little damage. Fun fight here. Unfortunately, the same can't be said for our next fight. It's time to prepare for my least favourite Elden Ring boss, the Valiant Gargoyles. I know some people find Godskin Duo worse, but for me, this fight is truly dreadful. But on this run, I think the Godskin Duo is going to be worse purely on the basis that this one actually allows me to use the best Spirit Asher in the game, Mimic tier. That's right, I'm bringing out the big guns. I'm going to use the Remembrance weapon from the Regal Ancestral Spirit, the Winged Greathorn, and also grab the Mottled Necklace +1 to help with the poison. The Winged Greathorn has a unique Asher Wall which spreads a cloud that inflicts a defense debuff on enemies that enter it. While this is good, this run has made me realize my big weakness in these games is slow heavy weapons, and the Winged Greathorn is indeed very slow. Mimic tier, for all the talk of it being overpowered, goes down quite quickly. Maybe +6 is just under for what this boss needs. In any case, it's a race against time to take out that first gargoyle. If you manage to do it, then this fight is fairly manageable, but both of them attacking at once is game over basically. The poison breath they have has a crazy range and damage, and is the thing that killed me the most for sure. This was the toughest thing so far. I really can't stress how much I dislike this boss. After quite a few tries, I managed to finally take out the first one with enough resource left to whittle down the second. I am so thankful this is over. What an awful, awful boss. But guess what? Tier 3 isn't over. We've still got the Lake of Rot to do. Oh man. At least we get this goofy mushroom crown, and there's a unique weapon here in the Scorpion Stinger, one of the few Scarlet Rot inflicting weapons in the whole game. Unfortunately, the boss we're going to fight now is totally immune to Scarlet Rot, so it's useless. This Dragonkin soldier is horrible to fight. The dagger does so little damage, and I constantly get knocked into the rot water, which is basically game over. I decided to switch to the Pestclave as it does more damage and has way better range. After a lot of deaths, I managed to take this guy down, but it was extremely annoying. Probably the most frustrating thing so far, maybe even above the gargoyles. The only positive is that we get the Dragon Scale Blade to use against the next boss. This katana has an Asher War that buffs it with Frost and Lightning, similar to the Dragon Halberd from earlier, only this weapon is faster and has a more preferable moveset for me. So now, we finish off tier 3 with Astel, Natural Born of the Void, one of the most visually striking enemies in the game. Thankfully though, not too difficult. I beat him on the second try actually without taking a single hit. This weapon does great damage, and we got a couple of staggers in there which helped greatly. He's immune to frostbite, so that part of the weapon didn't come into play, but it didn't matter too much. This was a cool katana. Feels pretty balanced, and obviously I love the katana moveset. This is up there in terms of my favourite weapon discoveries so far on this run. Hey, are we really at tier 4 already? This is going to get tough from here on out. Our first destination is the Shaded Castle. Now this is one of the first in a while where there are no weapons or armor laying around, so it's farming time. Thankfully, there are some Clean Rock Knights here, and I managed, luckily, to go get the Halo Scythe. I also got the Clean Rock Gauntlets and Helmet. I was tempted to get the whole set, but honestly I just got bored of farming and wanted to get the boss underway. The boss here is Elmer of the Briar. An interesting fact, until now I thought it was Elmer of the Briar. You know, like Elmer Fudd from Looney Tunes? Was that interesting? Anyway, this was kind of tough. He kills me in 2 hits. Part of this is because I don't have loads invested in Vigor because of working on stats needed for other weapons. I found the best tactic for this guy is to stay close to him. His close range moveset is much easier to dodge than the longer range telekinetic sword swings. I would bust out the Asher War when I first entered the boss fight, firing a few holy halos, but after that I just stuck to one R1 here and there between his attacks. We got a stagger, a bleed, and another stagger to bring this guy down. It took a bit of patience, but not too bad. The scythe's pretty cool with long range, holy damage, and bleed. Not bad at all, a worthy weapon for this run. Right, well, we're on to a bigger legacy dungeon now, Volcano Manor. So I came to another interesting situation with this. I sort of alluded to it earlier regarding the Volcano Manor assassination quests. Am I allowed to use equipment gained from them? The decision I made was that it was okay to use anything Tanith gives me, such as the Serpent Bone Blade, because I'm still getting given it in Volcano Manor. But the Scaled Set, for example, I get given outside of the manor after the kill, so this is not allowed. While the Serpent Bone Blade is a decent katana with poison built in, it's not quite as exciting as the Dragon Scale Blade. But still good. Poison is probably the weakest status effect, I think, though. I also farmed some trousers from the Black Frame Monk and grabbed the Spirit Ashes of Depraved Perfumer Carman. We're now ready for our first boss, the Godskin Noble. This is probably the easiest time I've had with one of these guys, mainly because of Carman. Am I pronouncing that right? Carman. Anyway, he seems to have loads of HP and heal himself while doing a good job of attracting the aggro, so I can get some poison in. I just want to mention, I gave Dark Souls 2 a hard time about hitboxes before, but I did mention that the other games do have examples of this as well, and Elden Ring is no exception. I mean, what the hell is that? How did that hit me? Anyway, this guy goes down probably easier than most times I've had to fight him, in no small part thanks to my trusty perfumer buddy. I don't think the poison helped all that much, but I didn't expect it to going in anyway. This katana is okay, but I feel there are better options for the katana enthusiast out there. Now, you might be thinking Rykard is next, but actually there's also the Abductor Virgin duo in here. A good chance to test out Godskin Noble's weapon, the Godskin Stitcher. As it's a duo boss, I thought I'd bring back Carman for another round. The Stitcher is not a bad weapon actually, decent reach for sure. No real noteworthy abilities, but not bad. Carman does a good job drawing that aggro as usual. What a great Spirit Ash he is. This fight isn't too exciting otherwise, and we bring them down. The weapon we get rewarded is the Inquisitor's Girandol. I tested this out a little bit on the Black Flame Monk, and it's not bad. So, this is probably a boring choice, but I am going to use the Serpent Hunter for Rykard. Most of the other weapons in here are fire-type weapons or require close range, which will end up in a swift death for me. I am going to bring in another Spirit Ash though, the Man-Serpent Spirit Ashes, plus his Crimson Amber Medallion that I totally forgot about for those other two bosses. Oops. I thought this Spirit Ash was actually going to be pretty useless, but this guy was the real MVP of this fight. He got right up close to Rykard and drew his aggro to easily close out the first phase. I was surprised, but the second phase went pretty much the same. He took all the aggro, and I just smashed Rykard with charged R2s. The fire damage didn't bother him too much, and being that close meant most of Rykard's attacks seemed to miss him. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Charged R2s did the trick. Thank you, little snake man. You're a true hero. Another great rune to add to our collection, and a nice variety of weapons we got to dig into here. Well, from one big legacy dungeon to another big legacy dungeon is Leyndell Royal Capital. This is a huge area with a lot of options, and there's a specific weapon here I am dying to try out. However, more on that later as we need to get past Not Free first. I grabbed some Leyndell Greaves and a Guardian Mask for a little protection, and then this weird weapon called the Cane Sword. It's weird because it looks like it should be unique, but there's really nothing special about it. But you know what? That's okay. My plan here was to grab a weapon I could give the Thunderbolt Ash of War to. We find that right here before I get brutally murdered by these guys. Lovely. With the Ash of War equipped, let's punish Not Free with a bit of long-range lightning. This works pretty well. The lightning bolt seems to almost always make him do the charge and stomp, which is very easy to avoid. I did forget to bring enough FP flasks to totally finish the job with this, but a few melee hits are all good to deplete the last of this phony's health bar. But really, he's just the appetizer. Now we can get the unique weapon I was talking about earlier, the Bolt of Gransax. Longtime channel viewer Colonel Cassidia, shout out to him, mentioned this weapon in a comment before, and the Ash of War is awesome. Jumping in the air and shooting forward a bolt of lightning. I feel like a Greek god. The only downside is I had to farm to get up to a monstrous 40 dexterity to wield it, but it's totally worth it. Of course, we can't have such a cool weapon without some equally sweet armor, so Alberic's set will do nicely. You're a wizard, Harry! We're dressed to impress, and it's time to take down Morgwyn the Omen King. I'm obviously using the mixed physic that boosts lightning, but wow, look at that damage. 1151! This didn't take too long. Admittedly, I did die a couple times. A lot of bosses in this game tend to input, read, and dodge when you do stuff like this, but at the start of the fight, Morgwyn just takes two to the face. It's amazing how much easier these games become when you have range like this. I don't know if they've ever really been able to balance it. Anyhow, the Omen King bites the dust after a few more blasts from Wizu Sturp. That Ash of War is absolutely epic. Fantastic weapon. Would definitely use this again. So now it's time to head under the capital to the Subterranean Shunning Grounds. Many people voted this as the worst area in the game, and I can see why. I get so lost in here, it's ridiculous. Also, the enemies have crazy amounts of health. There's no weapons laying around, so I had to farm a warped axe from this Omen guy, which took forever. There's blood-soaked mask and manchettes here for armor, which provide about as much protection as you'd think. Next to none. We also get Mog Shackle, which will come in handy, but still, I was thinking that I had a horrible boss battle ahead of me, but then I remembered something. There was one other set of armor and a weapon I could get here. The Dung Eater. This guy drops his whole armor set and his sword if you kill him here. So I set out to do that, and after beating him in a totally fair fight with no cheese whatsoever, we get the Omen set and the Sword of Milos. The Omen set is some super heavy armor, and I was actually overloaded wearing it. I thought initially I could try fighting Mog like this and charge to the boss store ready to go. Yeah, I'm not doing that. Time to level grind. Okay, so I got to a position where I'm fat rolling. I've actually never fought anything where I was fat rolling before since Dark Souls 1 where I didn't know what equip load did, so this should be interesting. It took a while to get used to the slow dodging here, but the sword does some decent damage. The Shriek of Milos lowers the boss's defenses for a bit and changes our R2, which is handy. This armor is awesome defensively, we managed to tank a lot of his attacks. The shackle of course helps a lot, and we even get a couple of poise breaks with our heavy greatsword. The main challenge was the rolling, but again, thankfully the armor's defense compensated for my numerous mistakes. In the end, Mohg goes down and we can finally get out of this sewer. Almost made me long for the depths of DS1. Almost. So we proceed past Mohg down into the final part of Tier 4, the Deeproot Depths. Now, we've actually got 3 bosses to fight in here. For the first one, we're going to be using this giant hammer type weapon, Staff of the Avatar, which has the Erdtree Slam Asher Wall. Think of a ground pound from a Mario game. There's also some ashes here we can use, the Mausoleum Soldier's ashes, which should come in handy. This first boss is Crucible Knight Siluria, and the ground pound does great damage here while our little knight army keep him busy. It actually summons 5 knights, so he's totally surrounded. This is pretty simple, and he goes down after less than a minute. Now, we're rewarded with Silurius' spear and the Crucible tree set. The last thing to pick up before our next boss is this talisman, which boosts resistance to death blight by quite a bit. This will actually come in handy. Now, the downside to this weapon and armor set is that, once again, I'm fat rolling, which tends to be the thing I struggle with a lot, but thankfully, it's an easy boss to begin with for his champions. The Asher Warfrost Spear is a ranged blast that does a pretty nice amount of damage. It tears through the first champion with no issue. Sorcerer Roger has a bit more holy defense, but still goes down after about 3 hits. Now onto the trio fight. I decided to take out Leyndell first. Again, 2 Asher War Blasts and a quick R2 get the job done. The other 2 remaining are a lot weaker, so it just takes 1 Asher War Blast each, and they go down as well. Now the thing I've noticed from this fight is that while the Asher War does a lot of damage, it does take a long time to charge up, and I'm not a fan of this spear's normal attacks. They're pretty slow actually. This could be an issue. In any case, we just got one more boss to take on here, Lich Dragon Fortis Axe. This guy always starts off with spreading some death blight clouds across the field, so hence why that talisman from earlier is useful. Sadly, the same can't be said for the Mausoleum Knights. He dispatches them in pretty short order. My biggest challenges here are adjusting to fat rolling and the moveset of the spear. I managed to whittle down his health a lot with the Asher War, but once I'm out of FP flasks, trying to hit his legs with the normal attacks is sometimes challenging for me. I thought about bringing more FP flasks, but I just can't reliably dodge stuff while fat rolling. This seems to be my kryptonite. Eventually though, I did manage to adapt and even got in a couple of good dodges to some of his moves. Landing an Asher War to his head does double damage, but it's not always easy to pull off as he moves it quite a bit. I finally managed to land some killing blows and I was ecstatic. Hopefully I don't have any more fat rolling fiascos. I also learned I'm just not a fan of the great spears, too slow and lumbering for my liking. But at least tier 4 is complete. The real challenge starts now though, I guess. Tier 5 begins, and it starts with one that worries me the most of any on this run, even more than the Haligtree or Ashen Capital, Castle Sol. There's only one boss here, but it might be the boss I struggle with the most in the whole game. Anyway, we'll get to that. So for weapon, we get the Eclipse Shote, a weird looking holy damage dealing curved sword. I really need at least some armor, so I farmed the Banished Knight helm and chest pieces, but even after an hour of farming I couldn't get the greaves or the gauntlets. Anyway, let's just get on with it. Commander Niao. Oh my god, I hate this boss. It starts off with this horrible gank with these super aggressive, fast moving and long reaching Banished Knights. I hate these guys. You can kill one if you manage to rush it quickly, but after you get rid of both, Commander Niao goes to phase 2. Here, his attacks will have crazy reach, and he uses these classic long-lasting delay attack combos Elden Ring is known for. Needless to say, I died a lot. This was probably the hardest thing I've done out of these 2 runs so far, harder than even the Godskins with the torch. It took many attempts, but I finally managed to pull it off. I had a really great run where I dodged a lot of his attacks, and he went down at last. This was pure pain, and I'm really glad it's over. Honestly, even Malenia or Elden Beast don't worry me as much as this guy. Let's never speak of this ever again, okay? Well, we're going to now descend into one of the most hellish looking locations FromSoft has ever created, Mohgwyn Palace. Seriously, this place is beautifully designed. There's just one boss in this area, despite it being so huge, Mohg Lord of Blood himself. So what are we going to use to fight him? Well, there is thankfully a full set of armor we can use here, the War Surgeon set you get from killing the nameless White Mask Invader. The White Mask increases damage for about 20 seconds when you make someone bleed. Now strangely, despite this being a late game area, there's very little in the way of equipment. No talismans to speak of apart from the Haligtree +2 talisman, but that's basically useless here. And actually no weapons lying around, so I did a bit of farming. I initially grabbed hold of the Ripple Crescent Halberd, which is a bit of a strange weapon. It has huge arcane scaling, but it doesn't have bleed and really can't be infused with any Astral Wall. The Halberd is okay, but there is actually another weapon we can get here which is a little bit more interesting. I did Var's quest stuff outside of here, which unlocks his summon sign, letting me invade him, kill him, and get Var's bouquet. The damage is low, but the bleed is high, and the Astral Wall lets me jab the enemy several times and restore health. I did a bit of a respec to an arcane build in preparation for this, and we were ready to go. Not gonna lie, this was pretty difficult actually. The damage from the halberd was okay, but not incredible. The bleed from the bouquet was good, but it takes more hits to bleed the enemy each subsequent time. I decided on a strategy involving both weapons. Phase 1, I would use the halberd focusing on jumping attacks and breaking Mohg's poise, which is not that high for a demigod actually. Once we were close to phase 2, I noshed the physic and then switched to the bouquet, spamming the L2 attack during his transformation. This just leaves phase 2 where Mohg has about 40% health remaining. This phase was pretty tough, but you know what, I've grown to really like this fight in this run. Everything is actually avoidable, but it's an intense fight. It's actually better to stay close to him, as otherwise the long range blood flame is quite an issue. I died quite a few times, but eventually I managed to get my dodging down, get an extra bleed in, and land a crucial finishing blow to clinch the fight. If you're watching this and thinking, well, you've leveled up quite decently, why did you find this so tough? I invite you to try the special challenge run conditions I did this fight under, which were beating Mohg using only equipment found in Mohgwyn Palace, while your 3-month-old son watches in the night garden in the same room as you. It adds a whole new level of difficulty, trust me, but you never thought you'd see a Souls video reference in the Night Garden. And if you're watching this and wondering what the hell in the Night Garden is, go YouTube search it, it's some pretty trippy stuff. Anyway, back to business, Mohg is down. I probably wouldn't race to use either of these weapons again, to be honest. The halberd isn't anything special and can't be infused, and the bouquet, while pretty funny looking and having high bleed, has very small base damage. Still, in all the challenge runs I've done, beating a hellish looking demon guy using a bouquet of flowers is certainly something. So, we're on to a big story legacy dungeon next, Crumbling Farum Azula, which has 3 bosses for us to contend with. There's a lot of equipment we can use around this level, although a fair bit of it unfortunately is only available after we do the first boss. I initially farmed some Beastman curve swords, as I do like the Power Stance moveset, and given the next boss is a dual boss, dual weapon seems apt. Godskin Duo everyone. A pretty notorious boss for its difficulty. Personally, I don't find this as bad as Valiant Gargoyles, but that's not to say it's easy. There is one positive though. Remember I said most of the good equipment is after this boss? Well, thankfully, the one thing we really need is available before it. Some Azula Beastman Spirit Ashes. I'm actually going to upgrade these to plus 10, as honestly I think it's needed here. I also decided to try dual wielding some Banished Knight halberds I managed to farm instead. I'm actually getting quite into the halberd moveset after the last fight. I know I supposedly can also get armor from the Banished Knights, but I farmed one for ages and it never dropped it, so screw it, I'm going in naked. Thankfully, the Beastmen do help a fair bit. They die about halfway through, but they keep the Apostle distracted long enough for me to weaken the Noble. I managed to jump attack and poise break just as the Noble was about to buff himself, which was good timing. The dual halberd did decent damage actually, and helped to minimize the time both of them were active. This was challenging, but honestly nowhere near as tough as Commander Niall from earlier. The Beastman Ashes really did make a difference, but this is only the start of our adventures in Farum Azula. Now we can finally grab the equipment I was talking about. First up, we get the Dragon Crest Shield Talisman plus 2 for a tasty physical defense boost, but also we can grab a sweet unique armor, the Drake Knight set. I've actually never seen this before, but I like it. Another very helpful talisman is nearby, the Bolt Drake Talisman plus 2, which, given who our next boss is, will be essential. Now what about weapons? Well, I could stick with these halberds and equip them with Black Flame Tornado I just got, but I have used this Astral Wall before, so I think I'll grab a different weapon entirely. I will use it to kill Burnhowl though, melts him pretty nicely and grants us the Devourer's Scepter, which will be our weapon of choice for now. The first thing to say is this weapon looks awesome. It's got a snake wrapped around it eating the world at the end. It's a great hammer type weapon, so heavy and slow, but powerful for poise breaking. The Astral Wall also steals some HP, which could be useful. So I'd say we're ready. It's time for my favourite Elden Ring boss, Dragon Lord Placidusax. Just look at this opening shot, that's one of the most epic things I've ever seen. Sadly, it's one of the few fights in the game with a bit of a boss run back, but it's not too bad, at least compared to the Dark Souls 2. Anyway, this did actually present a challenge. I seem to struggle a bit with great hammers. Surprise, surprise, big heavy weapons, am I right? The fight itself took ages and was a lot of running around, getting a big hit or two in and then running off. On 2 occasions, I came within a hair's breadth of victory, but that damn laser ruined me. Each fight attempt to get to that point was long as well, close to 8 minutes. The weapon's damage was okay, but not incredible really compared to what I was expecting, and the slow swings aren't really my style. Eventually, with a bit of persistence, I smashed him just enough times to bring this dragon down. An epic and intense fight as always, but not one I want to try again with a slow weapon anytime soon. But we do get a nice weapon as a result. That weapon, of course, is from Placidusax's Remembrance, the Dragon King Cragblade. This is actually a heavy thrusting weapon with lightning damage and a sweet Ash of War, but more on that later. First up, there's this draconic tree sentinel blocking the way. I debated whether to just run past, but you know what, that wouldn't be any fun. Our new weapon isn't a great choice though, as he resists lightning, so I'm bringing back the Power Stance Halberd with Black Flame Tornado. I was amazed at how easy a time I had with this setup actually. Normally this guy is pretty horrible to fight, but this was pretty fine. Power Stancing Halberds is awesome. Another of my favourite weapon discoveries of this run. Who knew? We have all these amazing weapons with unique Ashes of War, and here I am loving some basic halberd in each hand. Anyway, I'm going to slap on all of this guy's armor except the gauntlets so we stay in medium load, as we'll need it for this next boss. Historically, Malekith is a boss I've struggled with quite a bit, and I wasn't really sure about using a heavy thrusting sword with medium roll given how fast he is. But none of that mattered because the Dragon King's Cragblade has an awesome Ash of War. You turn into a thundercloud that damages anything it touches and then slam into the ground, dealing a nice chunk of damage. 2 of them is enough to get Beast Clergyman to stagger, and then a critical hit followed by another thundercloud is all it takes to end phase 1. This is where the real challenge begins. I've realised recently that the best tactic is to stay close to Malekith, so he does more basic sword attacks instead of his light speed jumping stuff. It took 3 thunderclouds to break his poise, and then it just took a critical hit and 1 more thundercloud to bring him down. This took maybe 7 attempts, which was a lot less than I was expecting. This Ash of War is amazing, seriously. The normal attacks of this weapon I'm not that keen on as they're quite slow poking thrusts, but that Ash of War is really all you need here. But what did I expect? My favourite boss Placidusax wasn't going to have an awesome weapon? Anyway, that felt super satisfying. Definitely would use the Cragblade again. Well, this moves us nicely onto our penultimate legacy dungeon, Leyndell Ashen Capital. We've got 3 bosses again to contend with, so time to prepare. First, despite the fact the capital is mostly destroyed now, there are actually 2 decent talismans to grab. Firstly, the Crimson Amber Medallion +2, which we can grab from dropping down this well. Second, the Erdtree Favour +2, which we can grab from this horrible area with ulcerated tree spirits. Thankfully, just before this part there are 3 Leyndell soldiers, which is good for me as otherwise I'd be screwed from a weapon and armour standpoint. I managed to grab a Leyndell soldier's helmet and greaves from one of them, and the partisan spear from another, so at least I've got something to work with. Now it's kind of a tradition whenever I do challenge runs that I struggle with a usually easy boss, and Gideon fulfills that role in this one. I beat Malekith in about 7 goes, while Gideon killed me over 20 times. Awesome. The magic does a crazy amount of damage, and he spams it so rapidly as if he has infinite FP, the dirty cheater. I got him in the end, but this was pretty annoying. A quicker weapon than the spear perhaps would have helped, but anyway. He drops his armor and his scepter, which I instantly equip for some Gideon cosplay. The scepter does magic damage and has an Ash of War that reduces nearby enemies' magic defense. It's also a hammer type weapon as opposed to a great hammer, so its attacks are a bit quicker than our last scepter experience. So now, we're ready to move on to the second boss of the capital, Godfrey. This was pretty challenging actually, but really fun. I do like this fight. The scepter doesn't do loads of damage, so it's a bit slow going to begin with. The first phase isn't too difficult. Most of the attacks have enough telegraph and there's several points between his combos where you can get a sneaky R1 in, or points after where there's enough time for a charged R2 or jump attack. That's what I find Elden Ring's really about, finding those openings between the moves. Phase 2 though is tougher. He's much more aggressive and particularly his one-hand swipe combo, which the best tactic is just to run away from. The grab attacks provide a good opportunity to do damage when you can dodge them, and again jump attacks can be slotted into certain places as well. This took a few attempts and a lot of dodging, and not getting too greedy. Eventually though, he tried 2 grab attacks in a row while he was at low health, and that was his downfall. Intense fight for sure. The weapon did okay damage, but the Ash of War didn't really seem to increase this by very much. Maybe only affects actual spell damage. Anyway, this weapon looks cool at least. So what to use for our final boss here? Well, it's just got to be Godfrey's axe, no question. Not sure how this is going to go using a colossal strength weapon against this boss, but let's give it our best shot. Radagon and Elden Beast. So just a bit of background, I've only beaten these guys twice. Once with Moonveil, and once on my level 1 run, but I did use Flame of the Redmanes, which has since been nerfed, but back then was crazy powerful. So using a colossal slow heavy weapon, which as I've said is not my strong suit, to fight these guys, is going to be interesting. I did a respec to pure strength and health to give myself the best chance. I did die a bunch, but you know what, this actually wasn't anywhere near as bad as I thought it was going to be. I'm not joking, I died more times to Gideon than Radagon and Elden Beast. Godfrey's great axe, although slow, does a pretty tasty amount of damage and is great for breaking poise. This allows me to take out Radagon without too much issue actually. It's kind of a similar fight to Malekith where he either destroys me in seconds or I manage to bully him around. He doesn't have huge health, and some of his hammer attacks actually miss when I'm charging in R2, which looks awesome. I felt like I really got Radagon's fight down here actually. I was more worried about Elden Beast, but this was the really strange part. I didn't struggle with him that much at all. Most of my deaths in this fight were from Radagon. In fact, I probably beat Elden Beast the 5th time I got to him. In the past, I really struggled avoiding some of his attacks, but this time I managed to dodge a lot of them. Sure, there was the usual running around nonsense. That's not to say it was a breeze. The victory was super close. I managed to break his poise at just the right moment. See the health I had remaining with no flask left? If I hadn't broken the poise right at that moment, it would have been game over. Honestly, I'm really happy with how this went, and I feel very satisfied to have overcome the fight with a weapon I would never normally consider using. I've got newfound respect for the big heavy weapon users amongst the community. But of course, this ain't over just yet. There's still one more legacy dungeon to do, the Haligtree. Now this one only has 2 bosses to contend with, but one of them we already know is going to be tough. Anyway, first off, let's grab ourselves some equipment. It's finally time for me to use another well-known meme weapon, the Envoy Longhorn. I wish I had farmed this back in Leyndell honestly, because it's much more difficult to farm it here. It took a long time and a lot of accidentally knocking enemies off branches, but we got it in the end. Conveniently nearby, there's also the Envoy Crown which powers up the Ashen Ward that this weapon has. The Envoy Longhorn is basically like a giant musical instrument. It functions like a great hammer, but its Ashen Ward blows out bubbles that deal holy damage, and it's pretty awesome. As well as these, there's a couple of talismans in the area we can grab as well. First, the Pale Drake +2 talisman, which vastly increases our resistance to non-physical damage, also will be good for the next boss, but there's also the Viridian Amber Medallion +2, which gives us extra stamina. Nice. Right, so now it's time to fight Loretta, the real one this time. She has a lot more health and some new attacks. The bubbles do good damage, but the Ashen Ward is slow to use, and I have to pick the right moments, otherwise she dodges a lot of the bubbles. I made use of some jump attacks as well to mix things up. The clinch moment late in the fight was when I staggered her with a jump attack, and then used the bubbles at close range for massive damage. One further round of bubbles staggered her again, leaving her ready for a finishing blow from our mighty pipe. This weapon is awesome. I knew it was going to be awesome before even trying it. I really enjoyed it. The Ashen Ward is very fun, and of course I just love the silliness of it. Would 100% use this again. Well, this is the final section of our little challenge run here. The second part of the Haligtree Legacy Dungeon, Elfile Brace of the Haligtree. You know who we're going to fight here, but what shall we use to fight her? Well, I've got a little setup in mind. First off, we run up high to grab the Miquellan Knight Sword, and then run into a Crystalline Onslaught to grab the Rotten Crystal Sword. Next there's one more talisman to add to our collection, the Dragon Crest Great Shield talisman, which boosts our physical defense massively. Lastly, what about armor? Well, there is some Haligtree soldier armor, but actually I'm going to opt for the Traveler's set right near the boss room, mainly because I want to ensure I'm light rolling for this. So here it is. We're going to power stance the Miquellan Knight and Rotten Crystal Swords for a combo of holy and magic damage. The Rotten Crystal Sword is one of the few weapons that inflicts Scarlet Rot, but to be honest, our boss has such high resistance to it, I doubt it will ever come into play. The Miquellan Knight Sword has a holy projectile Ashen Wall, not that it's going to do too much damage here. So this is it. Our final setup for the battle you've all been waiting for. Before you say it, I know there's also some Spirit Ashes that I could use in this area, but this is one boss I feel I need to do solo. Our boss is of course Malenia, Blade of Miquella. I was nervous about this. I've beaten Malenia twice before, once normally and once on the no leveling run, but the key difference between then and now was that I had used Bloodhound Step, so if I'm successful, this will be my first time beating her without it. The last time I fought her was back in May of 2022, so question to you all, as I haven't really kept up with all the patch updates. Has Waterfowl Dance been nerfed in some way? I remember back then it felt near impossible to dodge it normally, but here I had loads of time to create distance and dodge. Sure, there were some times where she did it at close range and it took me out, but this wasn't as bad as I remembered, and you know what, instead of me describing this, how about I just let the action of this fight speak for itself. Cue the music. Honestly, I'm happy with that, especially the holy projectile I spoke down on being the finisher. Like I said, I'm 100% sure this has been made easier in some way since I did it in May. Even so, this was a great moment and a really satisfying conclusion for this run. Are you still with me? Did you watch all the way to this point? If so, thank you, and I really hope you enjoyed this video. Compared to the minor dungeon variant, this had a lot more options to play with, and I got to try loads of unique weapon combinations, which I probably never would have. This was a lot of fun, and I recommend this if you're like me and sometimes aren't that imaginative with your weapon choices. Variety is the spice of life after all. Let me know your thoughts on the run or other runs you'd like to see in the comments below, and if you'd like to see more of this content, make sure to hit the subscribe button to support the channel. Until next time, see ya, and have a good one.